So I was in high school during the heyday of the scourge that was known as Abercrombie. Does anybody remember this store at the mall named Abercrombie? You had to wear a gas mask in because it smelled like cologne so much and everything was way too expensive to buy. You guys remember this? Is it still a thing? I haven't been in the mall in years, okay? Maybe it's still a thing. But it was the heyday, and so it was normal in my high school for guys to show up dressed head to toe in Abercrombie. All Abercrombie. But I wasn't normal because I had to buy my own clothes. I worked I'd stain some decks, I stained decks, I mowed yards. And so instead of being decked out in Abercrombie, I was decked out in the finest that the clearance rack of Marshalls had to offer, okay? So I was a little different. It's a little weird, right? And, so some years pass in high school, and I start feeling, I want to be a little more normal. I want to fit in, right? Have you ever had this sort of thought? I want to be normal. I want to fit in. Well, I couldn't really afford a whole lot at Abercrombie, but Abercrombie had a little brother named Hollister. It was a different store in the mall, right? So I went into Hollister one day, and I bought one white polo shirt, right? And had a big bird on the pocket, so you know where it came from. And the next day I walk into school, and I felt like I fit in. I felt normal. I felt cool until lunch. See, at lunch, my name Adam. My friend Adam, he accidentally bumped me with his elbow, and I watched as one drop of pizza sauce, slow motion, hit my shirt and stained it. So the rest of the day, I'm walking through school thinking, I was going to be all cool wearing the shirt, being normal, looking like I fit in, but instead I stuck out because I had a big old pizza stain on my shirt. Now, we all want to fit in, right? Nobody wants to be weird, particularly when you're a kid. Didn't you there's this instinct of, I kind of want to fit in, I want to feel normal, I want to feel like I belong, I don't want to be that person who sticks out. And then as you become an adult, it goes away. No, I'm just kidding. It doesn't go away, right? There's some of that always just stays around in your mind, and it's a problem because the thing in faith is, right now particularly, our world, our culture is so miles apart from the ways of God. And so if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, there are going to be things where you're going to stick out, where you have to be different. There's just going to be, if you're going to follow Jesus today, there are going to be ways in which you got to be weird. You're not going to fit in, right? You're not going to be normal. But we have such a drive, such an instinctual drive. This is why every kid has it. This is why I bought that silly white polo, right? Because we have this instinct that I do want to fit in. I don't want to stick out. I want to be normal. So how can we have that courage? How can we have that courage to stick out? How can we have that courage that we need to be different, to not be normal, to be a little weird? Well, today in the story of Daniel, we're going to see Daniel having that courage. And I think he's going to inspire us to do the exact same thing. Now, this is a story that we're kind of familiar with, but it's actually a little different than how we often think of it. So Daniel lived about 2,600 years ago. He's this Jewish man living in Israel as he grows up. And then when he's a young man, Babylon, the Babylonian Empire, invades Israel, and they take them captive, and they take Daniel away into this indoctrination program in Babylon, but Daniel stays faithful. He doesn't compromise his faith. And so God blesses him, and he rises through the ranks of the Babylonian Empire, and now it's been decades since. Decades of living differently than everyone around him. Decades of sticking out in this empire for his faith. And today in our story, Daniel's faith is going to be really tested. Is he going to compromise to fit in, or is he going to be different and stick out for his faith in Yahweh? Now at this point, Daniel's an old man. He's not a young man anymore. He's risen all the way up to being one of the top 3 in the empire. And it's actually not even the same empire anymore. The Babylonian Empire was replaced by the Medo-Persians. And so he's in a different empire, but he's risen up in the ranks of that one too. And he's one of the 3 most important guys in the empire ruling things. But now the king, King Darius, has decided to make him the top dog. He's going to be the number 1, like the prime minister of all of the empire. But of course, there's some other guys who don't like that. There's some other guys who are jealous There's some other guys who want his position. And so if you have your Bibles, you can turn to Daniel chapter 6, or the verses will be up on the screen here. We're going to start in verse 4. At this, the administrators, so at this is at, the idea that he's going to be in charge. The administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel and his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. So they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Weird is not wrong. Weird is not wrong. So you have these guys that they're jealous. They want to take this position. Daniel's rising up. They don't like it. They're trying to undermine him, trying to steal his position. But they couldn't actually find anything wrong he was doing. Nothing. Nothing. They couldn't find it, but they still hated him. They still hated him. So there's nothing wrong that he's doing, and yet they still hate him. There's this kind of odd idea right now in a lot of the Christian ethos in our country that if you're doing faith right, well, it's got to mean that everyone's going to like you. The idea is that if non-believers think poorly of you or insult you, call you names, that you've got to be doing faith wrong. But that's totally the opposite of what Scripture tells us. Daniel was doing everything right, and he was still hated. He was a trustworthy man of character. They could find no fault in him. And yet, those who didn't believe in Yahweh still hated Daniel. Jesus told us this would happen. Matthew 10:22, he said, "You'll be hated by everyone because of me." So why, in our present day, do so many Christians feel like they need to go along, like they need to be normal, like they need to fit in? Of course we're not going to fit in. Of course we're not going to be normal with the world today. We have to know we need to stick out for our faith. We should look different. We should. Weird is not wrong. Verse 5. Finally, these men said, so these guys trying to steal Daniel's position, they said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. In writing. Trusting God's going to make you a target. The bureaucrats, all these bureaucrats under him, they want to bring Daniel down, but they know Daniel's integrity is spotless, so they come up with a scheme. They come up with this scheme. And the scheme says that they pass this law that if anyone prays to their God, because remember, these empires, they're made of different little nations, little people groups, tribes, and they each have their own gods. If anyone prays to their own God for 30 days, or any other person, that they're going to be put to death, right? They're going to be put in a lion's den and die. They want them to only pray to the king as God. So anyone weird enough to get caught praying to their own God's going to get eaten by lions. And they know that because he's a faithful man, Daniel is about to be trapped. Because he's either going to have to compromise his faith to fit in with everybody, or he's going to become kitty food, right? This is what's going to happen. They're trapping him. They're trapping him. They're going to take his position. So, 1 minute history lesson to make this make sense for a little bit that often we don't quite understand. So most ancient empires, so Rome, Babylon, the Medo-Persians, they were polytheistic. So they believed in many gods, not just one God. They were pluralistic in their beliefs. And when they conquered a new land and there was a local god in that land, they wouldn't say, well, now you have to believe in our gods and not this one. What a lot of these empires would do is that they would actually go, oh, no, you keep worshiping your God. That's just fine. We'll actually take that God and put that God in our pantheon as just one of many of the gods now in our empire. And so they would actually gain gods as they went, as they conquered. As long as your faith said that there were many gods instead of one God, they were cool with it. They were just fine with how you worshiped. The problem that these guys were having with Daniel is not that he believed in the God of Israel. It's that he refused to believe in anything but the God of Israel. Their problem wasn't his faith in God. It was that he only believed in Yahweh. These pluralists could only tolerate the belief of other pluralists. Thinking there are many paths to God actually ends up being a very intolerant belief system because you can only tolerate other people who also believe there are many paths to God. So the fact that Daniel only worships Yahweh, it's weird. It sticks out. Everybody else in the kingdom, everybody else in the empire has been willing to bow down and go, okay, I'll believe there's a lot of ways to God. I believe there's a lot of these gods. That's fine. Daniel's like, no, I trust one God. I pray to one God. I believe in one God and no other. That's what gets him in trouble. Trusting God will make you a target. Trusting God will make you a target. Verse 10. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows were opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Daniel, what are you thinking? Like, it's just 30 days. Daniel, what are you doing? So you're going to go home and you're going to pray where everybody can hear you, right? You're going to kick some windows open? Daniel, it's just 30 days that you're going to be put to death for praying to anybody but King Darius. Why are you doing this? What would a normal person, think about it, what would a normal person do in this situation? Like a normal person would either not pray for 30 days, or you'd go at your house and you'd find that like most private closet. You'd go in there and you'd be like, oh, please, God, like you whisper a little prayer no one else could hear. You'd have this little private prayer time, and then you'd come out and that was there, and then you go about your public life, right? What you would do is you'd just make your prayers totally private. You would make your faith totally private. Why in the world is the dude kicking open the windows and praying out loud? Why is he just so determined to have this public faith? Public faith. Isn't this what we're told today? Have a private faith. It's fine what you believe. Just keep it to yourself, right? But Daniel's not willing to do that because a private faith is only faith when it's convenient, which means it's not a real faith. But not Daniel. When he learns about this law, he goes home, kicks the windows wide open, he prays out loud for everybody to hear him, and it says he does this 3 times a day. 3 times a day. And he points it's also a funny little detail in there, he points his face towards Jerusalem. Now at this time, Jerusalem had been destroyed. The temple was destroyed. So he's actually praying a prayer in a way that shows you that he still has hope and trust in God, that God is going to come restore the temple. He has this incredible faith. He's not willing to settle for a private faith. He's willing only to have this public declaration of faith. He doesn't care what these people think of him. His faith is public, not private. He doesn't keep it to himself. There's no secret what Daniel believed. Because the quickest way to stop caring what God thinks about you is to start caring too much about what others think about you, right? It's the quickest way. That's why when our culture stands against us, it's hard to stand up for the Lord. Because we want to fit in. Man, we want to be liked. We want to get along. We want to get along, so we keep it private. We care about what people think about us, and that's why we don't want to seem too weird. But for Daniel, his habit of kneeling before God gave him the confidence to stand up to his culture. He's not going to keep his faith a secret. He's not going to hide it. It will not remain only private. Have you noticed in the story how everyone knows what Daniel believes? Yeah, he lives a public faith. He lives a public faith. You're supposed to kick the windows open. People at your work, people in your friends groups, people who are parents of the kids, on your kids' soccer, they're supposed to know what you believe. They're supposed to know that you're a Christian, that you follow Jesus. They should know this. And we're just fine. We should be just fine with being able to be a little weird to people around us. That's okay. Authentic faith is public. Public, not private. Verse 11. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except you, your majesty, will be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. Now, it doesn't seem like anybody but Daniel's getting in trouble, does it? They don't go like, oh, well, we found these 374 people praying to their God, and they should be put. It's only Daniel, isn't it? It's only Daniel. But Daniel doesn't care. Even if he's the only one doing the right thing, even if he's the only one staying faithful, even if everybody else thinks he's weird and different, does not care. He'll be the only one. Verse 13. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. But those conniving guys have been working behind the scenes to get underneath Daniel and get his position. They remind the king that he can't do it. It's already sealed. It's already happening. Daniel is going to be put in the lion's den. Verse 16. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you. A stone was wrought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. He was so upset that he didn't even watch Netflix, right? Goes back. So some years ago, I got to go to Africa, to Namibia, and we're out on this safari. And we're all in these different trucks. It's a little convoy of us, and we're back in the middle of absolutely nowhere, like a day away from the nearest village. And we come to this big expanse, and there's this pride of lions. And we stop, and I don't know why we've stopped yet. And I'm the second car and driving, and so I stop, and I look to my right, and out way kind of further away, there's this group of lionesses they're hunting. And then to the left, there's this lion kind of gnawing on a bone. I'm like, this is a bad place to stop. Well, why are we stopped here? And so eventually I kind of crane my neck, and I see that in the very middle of the road, in front of the first car, this big daddy lion has laid down and fallen asleep in the middle of the road. And so I got up, and I woke him up. Now, I didn't do that, man. I stayed in the car. We waited it out. He was huge. He was huge. You could hear him snoring, like just the mouth on that guy, the teeth. He was faster, bigger, stronger, everything than me by 10. He was scary. I wasn't going to wake him up. I was checking the door like, I'm glad I'm in a Toyota, right? Things it was scary. It was intimidating. Like lions, you got no chance. Now put yourself in a den with a bunch of hungry lions and just you. Yeah, you're kiddie food, right? This is scary. This is terrifying. What do you think Daniel's feeling when he gets thrown into this place? His heart's racing. But right in this moment, as the lions roar and begin to close in on him, we're not told what happens. Now, I bet you can guess what happens. So right when he gets thrown in to the lion's den, he's got all these lions that are circling around him, and they're hungry, and they want to eat him. What do you think he did? Based on his character that you've seen in these weeks, right, and what he's done, and what you've seen him already do in the story, what did he do? Pray, right? Absolutely. And so the only safe assumption in the story is that he gets down on his knees and he prays. He prays. And this is no normal prayer. This isn't, oh, God, please bless this cereal for breakfast, and thank you for helping me have a good day, right? It's like, God, save me. It's this dependent prayer. It's this desperate prayer he's praying. He's dependent on God. Today, only praying to get something out of God is kind of the norm, isn't it? You know what's weird? Having holy habits. What's weird is praying every day. What's weird is praying 3 times a day like Daniel did for decades. That's weird. That's unique. That's different. Praying not to get something out of God, but praying to spend time with God, to depend on God, to grow in your relationship with God, to hear from the Holy Spirit. That's weird today. That's different. That's not the norm, is it? But oh man, that's what we got to do if we're going to connect with the Lord, right? We need to practice prayer in order to become dependent on God. Because if you do the norm of today that you just pray when you're in a bind and you need something out of God, you're not going to be in that practice of really depending on God. You wake up every day and you pray. And you pray not to just ask him for stuff. You pray to be with him because you love him. God's going to grow that heart of dependence that you have for him. And so when stuff does come up, it's going to be instinctual, right? You're going to fall right to your knees in prayer. Your ability to stand for God tomorrow is going to depend on whether you'll kneel before him today. The practice of prayer gives us the gift of dependence, the gift of dependence. After decades of practice, right? Decades, he prayed 3 times a day. He practiced. He did it day in and day out. He was ready to do the same when it came to the moment he needed it the most. The practice of prayer gives us the gift of dependence. Verse 19. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. And when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted out of the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. Why was Daniel rescued? What does it say in the end of verse 23? Because he had trusted in his God. That's why he was rescued. Now think about this story. This story is famously known as Daniel in the lion's den, right? But notice, between verse 18 and 19, we hear nothing about what happened in the lion's den. Like if you were telling this story, if you were making a movie of this story, you would probably be tempted to spend half the movie on like Daniel gets in there and then he runs over here and, "Oh, please God." And then the angel, it doesn't say anything about what happens in the lion's den. Nothing between verse 18 and 19. It tells us just a bit later on in verse 22, but it says nothing about what happened in the lion's den because this is not a story primarily about what happened in the lion's den. This is primarily a story about the faith that got Daniel put in the lion's den and then the rescue that God steps in to give to get him out of the lion's den. That's what the story is about. This is a story about what Daniel did to get himself in the den and what God did to get him out. It's a story about Daniel learning to trust God enough not to be normal. It's a story about Daniel trusting God enough to stick out and be a little weird. Verse 24. At the king's command, the men who falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Remember reading Esther a couple months ago when this happened? Yeah. Bad guys get theirs, right? Not a precious moment story. Then they got eaten by the lions, right? And the chapter actually ends. The beautiful part is the chapter actually ends with the king figuring out that there's something going on with Daniel, right? There's something going on here. And here's what the king says about what Daniel's God, about what Yahweh does. Verse 27. Yahweh, he rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. This is the signature of God written on every page of the Bible. This is it. If you trust me, I will rescue you. If you trust me, I'll rescue you. Every page, every story, if you trust me, I will rescue you. But here's the thing, that today, obviously, It's just human nature that normal is to trust ourselves. Maybe trust a few other people in life, right? What I really trust, what I really put my faith in is my own hard work, my own intelligence, my own ability, my own ability to figure out what to do next, my own decision-making ability. That's what I truly trust in, is me. I trust myself. That's what's normal. And if you've been doing that for years, then part of this story is to get you to see that you need to put your faith in God. Because someday you're going to be in a crisis. Maybe not a lion's den, unless you go to the zoo and something weird happens. But it's going to happen, right? You're going to need to trust God. And so what I want you to see is this word rescue that the king uses in verse 27. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. Well, we rely and trust in who to rescue us. It's Jesus, right? And the thing is that there's actually all these similarities that you might not see between what happens to Daniel in this scene and what happened to Jesus the day he went to the cross. And I think it's a subtle way that God uses to get you to see what you need to trust, who you need to trust in order for you to be rescued, right? So here's a few of the interesting similarities that you're going to find in these two stories between Daniel this day in the lion's den and Jesus the day he went to the cross. Okay, so here's a few of them. Both of them, Jesus and Daniel, they're conspired against by a group of powerful people, right? But for both, there was no basis for the charge that was brought against them. For both Daniel and Jesus, both of them, they were then found to be guilty of breaking the law, even though they were innocent. For both Daniel and Jesus, the person in power actually tries to intervene for them, but kind of does it in a half-hearted way and is unsuccessful. For Jesus, it was Pilate, if you remember that part of the story. For Daniel, it is King Darius. For both Daniel and for Jesus, they both stayed faithful, even though it looked like it was going to be the end of them if they kept faithful to the Lord. For both Daniel and Jesus, they descended. Daniel descends down into this pit. Jesus descends down into the tomb. And then both for Daniel and Jesus, they walk out alive. Right? Do you see the similarities here? It's God's subtle way to leave these little clues in the story to get you to point to your story and see who you need to trust in order to be rescued. Jesus is all over this story, and just like God rescued Daniel because Daniel trusted God, God will rescue you for all eternity if you trust in Jesus. The thing is that first you're going to have to stop trusting yourself, and that's pretty weird because trusting yourself is pretty normal. Even trusting yourself for eternity, your own work. It's weird to trust God and depend on him, but the thing is that trusting God results in rescue by God. Trusting God results in rescue by God. So this is the story of Daniel in the lion's den. It's a story about a man who chooses to stick out for God. Nobody else is getting arrested that day for praying, are they? It's a story of a man who trusted God enough to be different, to be faithful, a man who is willing to be weird for God, to stick out. Which brings us to today. There's a lot of pressure to stick in, right? To fit in. There's a lot of pressure to be normal, to not stick out, to go with the flow, isn't there? Maybe you feel this sometimes with a group of friends or even family. Maybe you feel this pressure to be normal at your work. Maybe you feel it every time you get on certain websites. Maybe you just don't get on them, but, we feel this pressure to be normal, to not stick out, to fit in. And we know through a lot of research and surveys and whatnot that a lot of people who call themselves Christians are caving to this pressure. They are. I mean, survey after survey has showed us that most people who call themselves Christians today have caved in, compromised with, want to fit in with the belief of today, the normal belief that there's many ways to God. Even most people who would say they're Christians no longer believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. And all sorts of surveys have showed us that most Christians, most people who call themselves Christians, I should say today, have gone along with the norms of morality, of what's right and wrong. And they fit in really well into the norms of society, and they're very different than Scripture, right? This is what surveys are telling us left and right, that many people who call themselves Christians spend their money and their time and live their lives pretty much like everybody else does. They don't stick out. They're normal. Most Christians have decided it's too costly to be weird. Oh, we don't want to be normal, do we? But most of us do. And here's the thing. Normal today is not working. So we have this instinct, right? We have this instinct, I want to fit in, I don't want to stick out, I just want to be normal. And so we compromise, and we compromise, and we compromise so we can fit in, so we can be normal. And then we realize someday that normal isn't working. Like seriously, today in our culture, normal is not working at all. Look around. Do you think normal is working right now? A few statistics. Normal is being strangled by your debt. The average household American debt is at an all-time high. Half of Americans carry credit card debt month to month. That's normal, is just being strangled by your debt. Normal is never actually being present with anyone. Average statistics are that the normal American adult spends about 11 hours a day on a screen, right? So even when we're with people, we're not with them. That's what's normal. What's normal is being angry and divisive and hateful. We can look around at the political scene and everything, and we know that that's become the norm. Normal is being depressed. Depression is skyrocketing to all-time highs in all demographics. Teenage girls now at this point are reporting, most of them are reporting, to be struggling with depression. Normal is feeling isolated. 60% of Americans report feeling lonely on a regular basis. That's normal now, is loneliness. Normal is having broken relationships. Normal is having never enough time. Normal is feeling stressed out. Normal is feeling dissatisfied. Look around a bit. Does normal seem like it's working? Doesn't seem like it's working to me. Normal isn't working. So why in the world are so many people who say they believe in Jesus, why are we in such a rush to fit in? What? Why in the world would we want to be normal? It's not working anyway. It's not. Normal isn't working. But I want to be weird. I want to be weird. And the question is, do you trust God enough to be weird? Do you trust God enough to be weird? And I get it. We have an instinctual thing, instinct in us to want to fit in, don't we? That's why you would go to Hollister as a teenager and buy a white polo and show up the next day and think you were cool because it had a little bird on it, right? Because you want to fit in. I get it. We all have that. It's instinctual. Like if you were in a pack of zebras, you don't want to be the weirdo in the back. You're going to get eaten. So we have this instinct of, I want to fit in, I want to be normal, I don't want to stick out. But why be normal when normal isn't working anyway? Why compromise your faith when normal isn't working anyway? Stay weird. Stay different. Do you trust God enough? Do you trust God enough to be weird? It's weird today to say, I believe there's only one way to God. It's weird, statistically. It is very weird and different to be like, yeah, I believe Jesus is the truth, the way, and the life. And that's it. He's it. That's a weird thing to believe, statistically. It's different. You will stick out. You will stick out. But do you really want to fit in when the price could be your soul? Do you really want to be normal when normal isn't working anyway? And hey, I get it. You want to be normal and not stick out when it comes to just how you live and your morals, and you want to kind of go with the world and fit in. I understand that we've got that instinct, but it isn't working. The way people are it isn't working right now. So why do it? Why not decide to be weird? Weird's kind of fun anyway. Be different. Stick out for your faith. Stick out. Do you trust God enough to be weird? Do you trust God enough to be weird? We're going to be taking communion here in just a bit. And I just love this story because there's a lot of stories, particularly in the Old Testament, where we read them and then we're like, okay, what is this about? And I have 17 ideas and I'm not sure, like we're trying to interpret it. But in this story in verse 23, we found out what it was about. Why was Daniel rescued? Because he had trusted in his God. Because he had trusted in his God. What's normal now is to trust in yourself, even for your own salvation. Again, statistics tell us most people think you can earn your way to God in some way. That's what's normal, but it's not what's biblical. It's not. It's not. We trust in God and God alone. We are rescued, as verse 23 tells us, because we trust in our God. And that's the reminder that communion gives us every time we come to the table, that it is not what we earn. We don't get to heaven and go at the gates, well, God, here's my notebook of all the good things I did. No, we get up there and we go, I have faith and I trusted in your son, Jesus, and his death and his resurrection. That's all we have to bring. And what communion is this reminder when we come to the table that we didn't do it, that it was Jesus, it was his sacrifice. That's why we take the bread, it reminds us of Jesus' body. That's why we take the cup, it reminds us of Jesus' blood. And as I come to the table, I always say to myself, his body broken, his blood shed for the forgiveness of my sins. To remind myself, I didn't do it. Don't trust myself. I got to trust in the Lord, just as Daniel did. The only reason that we'll see each other again after this life is because we trust the Lord, right? That's why we come.